let's quickly talk. I'm going to ask you about the Div 296. Then we'll just go over these listener questions. Then maybe you can tell us where we're at with ART, any updates from your side of the table.
Sure.
But just while you were talking there, there hasn't been much chatter at the moment on the Div 296. I was just looking up what's the latest. I think within the last 24 hours, there's a Daily Telegraph article, Liberal elder blasts Labor's troubling super tax. So Labor's troubling super tax on unrealised gains and wealthy super balances has united political leaders from both sides, with Philip Ruddock backing Paul Keating on the issue. So there's a few elder statesmen out there coming out to say this is bonkers, but Chalmers seems to be hell-bent on putting it to bed. But yeah, at the moment, I think I guess when Parliament comes back and bills are tabled, the discussion will increase again. But so far, it seems like it will be put to bed. Do you have a view, either as an economist or as ART?
Yeah, ART's view is that we don't have a big problem with it. You basically you're affecting a relatively small number of people. So a relatively small number of people in the tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, are going to pay modestly more tax each year on their returns on balances above $3 million. The bigger issue, though, for us is the indexation. So we would support either indexing that $3 million cap or put in place some other kind of review mechanism so that cap is reviewed over time. Because even though the future is inherently unknowable, it may affect relatively few people today, but it may end up in 15, 20, 30 years' time impacting a much higher percentage of people than you would otherwise like. And so some kind of indexation mechanism to us makes sense. This is also part of a broader issue too, is that if you think back, some of the major tax changes that were introduced in the mid-2000s, abolishing reasonable benefit limits, for example, and the changes introduced by Peter Costello, over the subsequent 20-something years, governments of both political persuasions have sought to claw that back because the magnitude of those tax concessions on super have basically gone too far. And so, in other words, if you think super is meant to basically save the government's budget by meaning that we're less, people will be less reliant on the pension, if you've got to give away so much tax in order to facilitate that, well, it defeats the purpose. And so to the extent that those massive super giveaways of 20-odd years ago are being wound back, that is no bad thing. You can argue about each individual measure, but certainly is there a need perhaps to make the system somewhat fairer? I think we would all support measures that would be making the system fairer. Yeah. Whether this is exactly the right one or exactly the right mechanism, I don't have a strong view, but
I'm not of the view that the slippery slope that they're going to turn around and tax unrealised gains in ordinary money outside super.
No, I don't see that at all. No.
I'm not of that. And there's going to be slippery slope people and all that stuff that I just...
I think that's always the... This really does highlight the problem of any debate about tax.
Yeah.
That even incremental change, people say it's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And it's like, sorry, that's a slogan, not a policy. Surely we can be a bit more constructive when it comes to tax than just talking about slippery slopes and running kind of scare campaigns on that basis.
Yeah.
We do need to make the system fairer. We do need to raise a bit more money to fund what the government needs to do, what we want the government to do. So, as I said, we don't have a major problem with it, but we would like to see some form of indexation or review mechanism.
And you would have members with balances over that amount?
Very few. If you think about it, we have relatively few members with those sort of balances. In fact, I think the last number I saw was it was either 60 or 80,000 people right now that actually have super above $3 million. We're talking about very, very few people.
Yeah.
And so in our members tend to be relatively young. The average age, I think, is about 40 to 45. Most of them are not going to be within cooey of $3 million.
I saw there was a report a few weeks or months ago on ABC, I think it was on 7:30 with, excuse me, they talked about a farming family and how this was impacting. But it didn't actually sound at all like the farm was owned by the self-managed super fund. They just had a self-managed super fund with other assets invested. And I think if you have a self-managed super fund, as a trustee, you have liquidity responsibilities.
Yes.
If you had a self-managed super fund with one farm in it with 4 members, you might have a bigger issue.
I wouldn't say that's a diversified portfolio.
No, but you may have a bigger issue if one of the members dies, or if there's only 1 or 2 members in there and one dies, and like their member benefit needs to be wound up. So sure, there's some paperwork and all that, but there could be bigger issues than Div 296 if you've got a whopping big asset in your self-managed super fund. That's what I'll say. Hey, it's Glen here. Thank you so much for watching today's video. You made it to the end. Can I ask a favor? Can you hit that like button and maybe hit subscribe if you want to get notified when we release further videos just like this one, whether you watch the Money, Money, Money podcast or Retire Right. And remember, if you want to learn more about investing, I've got an investing book, The Quick Start Guide to Investing, and there's a link in the description to get your hands on a copy. Thank you so much. Bye.